geopolitical analyst. Now, give a short introduction about our speakers. Mr. Muraleedharan Nair, after completing his studies at University of Kerala, did a postgraduate program in marketing and advertising from Bhubaneswar Rajendra Prasad Institute of Communication and Management, Mumbai. He has held various positions in the government in India and abroad. Besides publishing research papers in various books and journals, Mr. Nair writes commentaries in newspapers and magazines regularly. He also participates in conferences, seminars, and panel discussions on strategic affairs at different universities, think tanks, TV channels, All India Radio, etc. A distinguished senior fellow with defense research and studies, he speaks Urdu and Chinese as well. Mr. Don McLain Gill is a Manila-based geopolitical analyst and author who specializes in Indo-Pacific affairs, Philippine foreign policy, and India-Southeast Asia relations. He has over 100 publications to his credit, and he has written for major peer-reviewed international journals, book projects, and other top international affairs publishers such as The Diplomat, Asia Times, South China Morning Post, Observer Research Foundation, Economic Times, The Print, the Stimson Center, Financial Express, and The Pioneer, among many others. Don also takes part in interviews by international media on a wide array of issues regarding Indo-Pacific affairs, South and Southeast Asian geopolitics, and Philippine foreign policy. Welcome, Mr. Muraleedharan Nair and Mr. Don McLain Gill.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, to give a short introduction about what we're talking about today, let me rightfully, from the beginning, directly get into the newsmaker in the South Pacific. South Pacific is rising as a significant theater in the 21st century geopolitics. China's growing presence in the region is a cause of worry for traditional security providers like Australia and New Zealand. The recent security deal signed between China and the Solomon Islands is a case in point here, which has significant geostrategic implications. Further, China's attempts to carve out a common development vision for other Pacific Island nations is indicative of its long-term strategic goals in the region. China has been investing in the region since the 1980s. However, since 2008, there is a noticeable escalation in its volume. Understanding China's growing presence in the South Pacific from the beginning of the 21st century must also take cognizance of the changing patterns of engagement by the Western partners with the region's small island nations. In the Solomon Islands, where ethnic riots underlined by economic factors were exacerbating in the 2010s, traditional aid donors like Australia and New Zealand seem to have taken a backseat compared to its once active role through the Ramsey or Regional Assistance Mission to the Solomon Islands. As an effect of the recent security deal, China is expected to seriously amplify its presence by deploying police and military force to maintain law and order in the islands. Speculations are now rife that this could give China a foothold in the region to develop a military base so close to Australia and the US-based Guam. CPPR is hosting this webinar to invite attention to the implications of growing Chinese presence in the Pacific Island nations and South Pacific at large, as well as to discuss strategies that could be adopted in the long term for building strategic autonomy for the island nations. Now, before I hand over to the speakers, a note to the participants here. You may type in your questions in the chat box below. Those joining through YouTube Live can also comment there. Our team will collect the questions and we can ask them at the end of the Q&A session. You can also follow our live tweets and share your thoughts using the hashtag CPPR Town Hall. Now, to start off today's Town Hall, I would like to directly go to the newspaper of South Pacific for the past several months now, the China Solomon Islands security deal. So, Don, what do you think are the economic consequences of the security deal now between China and Solomons for the region at large?
Well, thank you so much, Sharon, for that. And I wish to thank the CPPR, of course, for the kind invitation and for organizing such a relevant and crucial topic regarding Indo-Pacific geopolitics. Now, I also wish to greet my co-panelists as well, Mr. Nardi, for sharing his thoughts and valuable experience as well. Now, you've asked a very particular question about the security implications, of course, and the geopolitical implications for the region. That's right, right? Okay, so now let's take a step back and ponder on the bigger picture. China seeks to promote its leadership and influence in the Indo-Pacific at the expense of the traditional and de facto leadership of the United States and the US-led order since the Second World War. China has recently floated the idea of a global security initiative, which draws from the new Asian security concept of 2014. Now, the framework really rejects any exclusive arrangements, particularly in the context of US alliance network or its strategic partnership in the Indo-Pacific or in Asia and the Pacific. And it centers on the idea, of course, of Asia for Asians. Now, moreover, of course, given its Chinese characteristics, the disputes will most likely be encouraged to be solved bilaterally rather than utilizing, of course, a wide array of international foreign multilateral engagements. But this is worrying, of course, given, of course, the power asymmetry in the region. So looking at the patterns, of course, what we can see here is that China maintains a dominant position in Southeast Asia. In fact, the US has acknowledged this time and time and again. Now, it continues to assertively maneuver in the East China Sea, of course, at the expense of Japan. China's also bolstered its capacity to constrain Taiwan on multiple fronts. And of course, it is trying to increase its strategic footprints and influence in the Indian Ocean region at India's expense as well. Now, recently, we can see that it is attempting to make inroads into the Pacific, which is very important considering its geopolitical configurations. China's former ambassador to the United States, in fact, recently in an interview claimed that the US and its alliance networks, they're really treating the South Pacific like their backyard, whereas China seeks to project the image of a natural and balanced partner, looking at them as equals. Now, China is trying to challenge the influence of the established status quo order, the rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, the protectors of this particular region, as we can see from the Quad, the four major democracies of the Indo-Pacific, China is really trying to challenge that particular leadership through the projection of a new model, as we can see through the Global Security Initiative. So this is something that we have to look into for long-term consequences. China seeks to use the particular leverage, particularly on its economic clout, for example. In fact, if we look at the Quad members, all four members are significantly intertwined to China in terms of economic interdependence. And among the most critical indicators for influence between an extra-regional and a regional state, if we look into the subdivisions in the Indo-Pacific, we have the Oceania region, we have the East Asian region. If you look at it, among the critical indicators, to show influence between an extra-regional power and the regional states is particularly in line with military or security cooperation with the regional states. So what we can see with the Solomon Islands really is China exerting its influence and promoting its leadership role as a security provider at the expense of traditional security providers, particularly the United States, Australia, to be able to counter that particular narrative at a time when the world, particularly the developing world in Asia, are looking ambivalently towards the West, particularly because of the response in the Ukraine-Russia war and the US messy withdrawal in Afghanistan. China is taking that advantage to really fill in the gap. And this is what we can see, slow incorporations of its leadership model. In fact, similar pacts are on the way, hopefully, according to China's plan, with Vanuatu and Kiribati as well. So we're looking into a series of engagements, bilateral engagements with the South Pacific in the Oceania region. So these are the particular implications that we can see in terms of the security and geopolitical impact of this particular deal, looking at it from a macro perspective?
Right. Thank you, Don. Murali, sir, you have seen through the years how China engages with countries, especially on the economic front. So, what do you think are the geopolitical consequences of this recent security deal?
Okay, thank you, Sharon. And it's so great to listen to Mr. Gill. An excellent presentation. Probably we all should listen to him more frequently whenever he speaks elsewhere also. Normally, a person like me takes time to warm up, to come to the point. So I think you have given me 5 or 6 minutes. So I request you to give me a couple of minutes more in case I take it. And you can reduce that time from my next round. I'm not going to into the details. John gave us Mr. Gill gave us a map picture, which was excellent. So I will go attempt it at a micro level, maybe at an anecdotal level. I'll try to break it down, especially for people who are not very well conversant with strategic aspects. I think a few of the people are there from the names I can see from my screen. So, but I'm not going into the details like the location, the importance of the location, details of the pact you were mentioning. There's no time for that. But we all know that this happened or is happening because of the heightened tensions, I will say, between China and US. Even the second Obama administration had given up, probably they thought that China will look after some parts of the Pacific, probably the western part. And the approach was that we will take care of the other parts of the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. China can look after that region and ensure stability there. But we all know that how China reacted later. So came the pivot to Asia. It was followed by the Quad. Quad, of course, is not a military alliance, but Quad without a military arm may not be well respected by the Chinese, knowing the Chinese from my experience in that country. Then came the Five Eyes Initiative, AUKUS. Now on the economic front, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. Here, Americans have named it Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. Had it been the Chinese, they would have said common prosperity. These are the nuances I can see here from a Chinese approach and an American approach. And we all know that China speaks of bigger things, but what they did in South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan, on the Indian border, we know the Chinese approach is very aggressive, not even assertive. So China has been very active in the Pacific. Their aim was to wean away, isolate Taiwan diplomatically, wean away all those countries, small island nations who had recognized Taiwan. Now only 4 of them are left. The last was Solomon Islands and Kiribati. But even in Solomon Islands, the province, I will say, the area, the island called Malaita, is pro-Taiwanese. They have banned Chinese investments. In fact, the Mr. Manesa Sogaware, the Prime Minister of Solomon Islands, is so unhappy with him that he didn't give money for a brain surgery, and Daniel Soidani, the premier of Malaita Island, had to go to Taiwan for his surgery. So things are pretty bad there. And the Chinese win over these countries, all small countries, with easy loans, bribes, easy loan means if you take a loan from IMF or somewhere else, there are so many rules to be followed. Whereas the Chinese just give the money. They have loads and loads of money under the disposal of the Chinese Communist Party, which is not audited in the way we know that happens in other countries. They have the BRI projects, which are very attractive to people, especially the leaders, but most of the deals are not transparent. We have seen what has happened to Sri Lanka, what will happen to Pakistan. And Pakistan, of course, China will show up. And China tried this particular security deal with Papua New Guinea also, but probably they disclosed it to the Australians and they saw that it won't happen. And China is is investing in a big way, as Mr. Gill said, in Vanuatu. I saw an interview of the foreign minister who says that I don't need, it's happening there. It's a huge high-rise a skyscraper and a huge port. They don't need it because they don't expect so many tourists to come to a place like Vanuatu, but Chinese are still building it. So we know about the riots that happened a few months earlier, maybe a year and a half ago. But Australia has a security pact with Solomon Islands, so they send their security forces, the police forces, to resolve the issue. But probably the Solomon Island leadership was not happy. They had already de-recognized Taiwan and had recognized China in 2019. That's after a gap of recognizing Taiwan for 40 years. And then, of course, the Chinese announced about the deal just before the visit of Mr. Campbell. He is Assistant Secretary of State looking after East Asia and Asian region in the State Department in the US. So they were clearly aware that Americans were aware of it. So before the Campbell went there and disclosing it or making it public to embarrass China, Chinese announced it. But it's not that China has not been engaging with Solomon Islands or the South Pacific in general. He had met the leaders in Suva, that is the capital of PNG, Papua New Guinea, in 2018. Then they announced the formation of a comprehensive strategic partnership at that time. He had visited China even in 2020 when he was vice president, then again in 2040 on his way back from the G20 conference. Then even when Wang Yi went there in May this year, Xi Jinping wrote private letters, official letter of course, private address to each of the 10 leaders who attended Wang Yi's meeting there. And in his letter, he speaks about China is a good brother, a good friend, a good partner. These are the words. These are very high-sounding words. Maybe when you deal with China, you know that things are different. And they insisted on mutual respect for common development. And Wang Yi tried to get pushed through that security cooperation agreement, a sweeping agreement covering right from fishing to security. But maybe the Micronesians, as far as you know, they shot it down, saying that this is dragging the entire region to a big power rivalry, which is not good for the nation.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Can I take 2 minutes more to?
Sure. Yes, please.
Yeah. China, if you look at China, they initially, after the liberation, they were very strict about, or they were very angry about America and other big powers sending military to foreign lands to address issues there according to their liking. Um, and they were vehement in their criticism. They even kept saying that a partial reason for America's decline, the so-called decline, is their misadventure of sending troops to other countries. Then they concentrated on economic development after Deng Xiaoping announced their opening and reforms initiative in 1978. Till that time, they were exporting communism, but they mellowed down on that. They still supported some insurgent groups, including in India's northeast. Then they had to protect their trade and increased. They had to protect their sea lanes, trade routes. Though they engaged in peacekeeping as an image building exercise, sent troops to UN missions. Then Chinese also, send their troops abroad for rescue missions, anti-piracy initiatives, etc., etc. But now they are sending military abroad because their priorities have changed. That is okay. One can understand it. If you look at from China's point of view, the Western powers led by America is trying to encircle them, isolate them. There is some sense in that argument. But here what they are doing is they are willing to send their police, PAP. PAP is the People's Armed Police. It's like our CRPF or BSF who are engaged in domestic. BSF is no more engaged in domestic law and order maintenance like CBRPF, but this PAP reports to the Communist Party, unlike our CRPF, which reports to the Home Ministry. So they are willing to send their troops or security forces to resolve domestic issues, to maintain social order. They may be, introducing or their own repressive measures, their repressive prying technology in all these things. And look at Australia has a police force. Now they have been allowed to be stationed in Solomon Islands till the end of next year. If there is an issue tomorrow, if there's an unrest, how will the Australians work with the Chinese, or will they be supporting different groups? Obviously, there will be a lot of confusion. So this is actually very unfortunate that the big power rivalry is drawing in rather peaceful. They have their own issues. They are ethnic groups speaking different languages. But unfortunately, China is there. They want to build a base. Once they come there, they know how to get it done. They have a large scheme of having 21 bases all across Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean, which came in Chinese newspapers a long time back, probably a Shantung newspaper, which was subsequently withdrawn. So probably they were testing the world with that information. So definitely this region is going to witness big power rivalry. And every peace-loving person should be alarmed at this development.
Sorry, I'm afraid I have to pause you there. Thank you for your interesting thought. And again, that leads to my second question, which is you were talking about how this domestic law and order is now being done by other countries, which sounds like outsourcing of security in a way, domestic security. So, Don, my question to you is outsourcing of domestic security a common practice across the globe? Is it something that we see in the contemporary times? And is it recommendable for small nations and island nations which lack the capacity to do so?
That's to me, isn't it?
No, it's to Don.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. And in fact, I believe that this is something that it has yet to be further looked into significantly, as it has not been given much attention to in academic discourses. But we have to understand, of course, that it is not a new phenomenon to have larger, more materially powerful neighbors act as security providers for smaller neighboring states, even when it comes to domestic affairs. So this is not a significantly new phenomenon. However, this particular aspect between China and the Pacific Islands comes with a few interesting twists. Regarding the Pacific Island, what makes it interesting is that China is an extra-regional power. It is not really seen as a traditional regional security provider in the Oceania region, as I've mentioned earlier. So while some experts have tried to water down the security pact between China and the Solomon Islands, saying that, oh, it is only for domestic security and development, it does not have significant geopolitical components, these particular components cannot be neglected given China's expanding influence at the expense of traditional security providers such as Australia, New Zealand, or even to an extent the United States. Now, that's one particular thing. So the domestic issue here is that China is slowly expanding its influence, and this is something that cannot be ignored. Now, the second part is, of course, this also entails costs for the inviting state. Now, as we can see throughout Africa, throughout Asia, being dependent on either external sources or private sources, such as private armies, when it comes to a state's domestic security, creates complications for the stability and legitimacy of the national government. As Mr. Nair has rightfully mentioned, it will become a complicated and sticky situation, considering if there's an overlap of regulations and mandates. So this may create further problems in the future when it comes to domestic unrest, given such a pact has international and not only domestic implications. The road ahead may also be quite complex. So we can see this with, of course, the controversies that have been compiled throughout the media, and of course private and public enterprises, and of course national and international voices, experts on the field. So we can see that this is a significantly intricate component, considering that the Indo-Pacific is now faced with an unfolding power competition between the United States and China. And how this plays out really cannot be seen as a separate development, but really part of an overarching framework of power competition between China and the United States. So how this would play along in the future is something that needs to be given much attention to. And it's not only from outside, but inside as well. Would this have a negative impact in terms of national stability, the ability of the de jure government to be able to operationalize its legitimacy towards its citizens? So these are the things that we need to look into when it comes to external sources providing domestic security. So I think I'd stop there in terms of outlining the complexity involved for outsourcing security domestically.
Thank you, Don. Now, following up on what you were talking about, Murali sir, you were talking about how the common vision for the Pacific nations has been framed by China, right? So my question to you is, since the Pacific Island nations have pulled out of this common development vision that China had advocated for the group of countries, what could be the strategies that China could now employ to actually build up a consensus to gain a foothold in the region?
I think my answer is a four-letter word. Don't be scared at the mention of four-letter word. It's cash, C-A-S-H, cash. China's biggest weapon is cash, it's money. And secondly, a recent controversy erupted when Joe Biden said that during the Xi Jinping's call to Biden after he won the election, he mentioned about democracies versus authoritarian rule. Democracies are a failure, something to that effect, he said.
Then Chinese came out, not officially, through back channels, said that the word was Chi Chuan, if I remember correctly, which means power concentrated at one place, whereas it has another connotation, which is called dictatorship. So the Chinese tried to clarify that. But only today the Chinese said, I think yesterday, it came in today's Chinese newspapers, saying that democracy is the cause for so many ills that are happening around the world. The Chinese always maintain that power concentrated at the center is easy for decision making. And it's true also. We saw what happened during the initial stages of COVID. Uh, so answering your question, I have a small story to share with you. It's not a secret, at least anymore. I have a High Commissioner Ambassador friend who retired recently, and he was in Africa, and he told me that when a Chinese ambassador goes to call on a minister or president or prime minister of a country, he carries a big, a suitcase full of gifts, uh, mobile phones, uh, tablets, or all tablets means all, as you know, this iPad sort of thing. I don't know what people call them these days, and they keep giving this to all the officials. Give to your son, give to your daughter, and even a uncorrupt person will be lured by the offer of a iPad for his son. He doesn't consider it as a bribe actually, but Chinese are doing their job beautifully. And when he visits the minister or maybe the secretary in that ministry, he has the power to invite the minister along with his wife and maybe the mother-in-law. That's not permitted. That's permitted in Chinese case. Whereas in Indian case, the ambassador has no power to invite the minister. He will invite. When he invites, he can make a request from the ministry to invite the wife also, but definitely not any family member escorting them. So Chinese have this cash which they are using very cleverly, and they are getting results, especially from smaller nations. And if you remember, there is this Stanley Kubrick. He was a filmmaker in Hollywood. He had a famous saying that smaller nations or greater nations behave like street gangsters, and smaller nations behave like prostitutes. That is true to a to a great extent. Smaller nations, they bargained, they bid themselves to the highest bidder. That's happening. So long as that prevails, that system prevails, there are corrupt officials and ministers, the top leaders at all countries, then this Chinese uh, assertiveness or Chinese agenda will click. And add to what Dawn told a little earlier, that there are instances where uh, outside forces have provided security, domestic security, or maintain social order. Yes, maybe we can do it under UN sponsorship. America hasn't done it, so America cannot say that. But at least India has not done it, without a proper invitation from that government in power. The issue here is that when you maintain social order, you are supporting a particular political party or a group in power who are supporting you, which is not good for democracy. This is what I meant by I'm worried about that. Now China will use this money. They have Confucius Institute. They have outreach program. They can invite anybody from the academia, media, anybody. Now they will take a different route. They will concentrate more on agriculture. They will talk about climate change in that area. They will give technical training. They will, of course, give police training to Solomon Island, but other places also, other islands also. Then intelligence sharing. They will help in fisheries, providing radars for fishery, and they will also help in preventing poaching
of fish. But the greatest groups of people who poach fish, maybe Mr. Gill will know that they are, right from our Andaman Lakshadweep area. These are the Chinese and the Taiwanese. So probably they may have to do something. They will be doing something. So if nothing works, and of course BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, uh, making countries trapped in debts. If nothing works, or along with that, they will be trying to divide these countries. That has happened in all places, like including in ASEAN. ASEAN has unfortunately a rule that all decisions are taken by consensus. Then they came with a new thing. It was long, very old thing, that ASEAN, 6 minus 1. Those days, only 6 countries were there in the ASEAN. Now it's a much larger group. So they will divide this group, or sow seeds of contention between them and get things done. They may not require all the islands on their side. They have this system of breaking chains. All these US has established military bases all across the globe, dozens of them. But China only has one in Djibouti, one is coming up in Gwadar. They may deny that. I saw a picture of one coming up in Cambodia, which nobody speaks about. Maybe it was fake news. Probably they are going to get one in Tanzania, maybe even in UAE. These may not be complete, full-fledged military bases. There may be facilitation centers for port calls, replenishments, rest and recreation for soldiers who have been in the seas for weeks together. So Chinese can apply this division of the grouping, and they are not friends with each other. Even in ASEAN, there are misunderstandings and all, but they are all matured enough to handle it properly to a certain extent. So definitely, China will be able to get a foothold in some of the islands. We don't know which all islands at this time. Definitely, they tried with Papua New Guinea. They are investing heavily in Vanuatu. Solomon Islands will be there. Australia will eventually be squeezed out. I read a few speeches of their prime minister in the parliament. So he's clearly pro-Chinese. If he comes back to power, definitely he will. I hope that none of the external forces try to stoke dissent and create unrest in these countries to enter that country surreptitiously. China might do it, US might do it, we don't know. Hopefully, let us hope that none of them do go stoop to that level to disturb peace in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Holding on to that thought, I would like, because we are on the nature and the strategies that China uses to interfere or influence a particular region, right? So I would like to address this question to Don. How can we view China's setbacks in Maldives, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka having an effect on the Pacific Island nations from pulling away?
Right. Thank you so much for that question. And I think that it is, in fact, very relevant. We have to look into the recent Comprehensive Security Treaty that was declined by the 10 Pacific states. So the 10 Pacific states, for that matter, declined to sign the Comprehensive Security Treaty with China, which was supposed to have significant implications for the region's political and security architecture. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, security defense cooperation is seen as perhaps the most critical component of any interstate relationship when it comes to gauging the influence of an extra-regional power. Now, this decline on the Comprehensive Security Treaty indicates that China still has some work to do in terms of cementing its influence beyond its locus of power in East and Southeast Asia. So it is important, therefore, not to exaggerate, not to over-exaggerate the capabilities of China's rise, but also not to undermine either given that it is growing by the day in terms of material and normative capabilities. And for a major power with deep pockets, we could see that its ability to influence policies in terms of its external engagements is significant. So we should not undermine that as well. Now, in terms of your question, while there are criticisms already in place towards China's alleged debt trap diplomacy going around and has been going around for some time, the recent economic crises in Sri Lanka, the exacerbating economic decline of Pakistan and Laos, two of China's significant commercial partners in South Asia and Southeast Asia, respectively, have also heightened the level of wariness among other states regarding the overdependence on the Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, China has acknowledged that because of the pandemic, there have been significant pushbacks, and we can see that the pushbacks continue even in Africa and South Asia, for that matter, where states are now toning down their ambitions towards the mega infrastructure investments of China under that particular program. But again, this is no time to be complacent, given, of course, the growing ambivalence towards the West, as I have mentioned earlier, because of what happened in Ukraine, because of what happened in Afghanistan, and many other examples that are now rooted in the political consciousness of public opinion in Asia, for that matter. Not only Asia, but Africa and Latin America. So more productive efforts must be made by traditional partners of the Pacific Islands if they seek to hold on to the leverage that they are slowly losing. So something practical is needed that needs to address the gaps that are constantly widening in the region, given, of course, the larger trust deficit that is worsening by the day. So we have to understand that China's ability to fill in those gaps significantly, such as, for example, in Southeast Asia, the preoccupation of the Bush administration towards the Middle East and away from South and East Asia and Southeast Asia really allowed China to cement its influence in the region. So China's policies really have been very calculated in terms of projecting itself as the leader of this particular region. But again, it is important not to over-exaggerate its capabilities, as it is in fact still limited in terms of its power projection in the Indian Ocean, for that matter. And as we can see, the decline for the treaty is also seen to be a pushback towards its influence in the South Pacific. But of course, as I have mentioned, the situation remains variable, as there are several factors involved that may fluctuate the calculations towards China's favor. So this we can see something that China is looking towards, and it is looking for more opportunities to really maintain its position and to enhance its leadership role in these particular regions. So the situation still remains complex. I don't see this as a particular win or loss, but really a part of an evolving geopolitical landscape in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you, Don. We are moving to the last question before we open the session to question answers. To Murali sir, what do you suggest are some of the measures that could work in the long term for building strategic autonomy for the small island nations, especially in the South Pacific?
I think what they should be doing, because we can look at it from an Indian perspective. India has been engaging countries in the South Pacific. We have been having good relations with Papua New Guinea, where we had issues when an Indian origin politician became the prime minister some years ago. So, but I think after Mr. Modi came to power, he has been visiting countries after countries, and he has visited Pacific Islands also in the past. Maybe it's time that he goes again to that area. But the main countries who are affected by this are this so-called security agreement are Australia and USA because it falls in the trade routes or sea lanes from Australia to the US. Australia has already woken up, or they were jolted by this sudden development. I read in some magazines that everybody was aware that something was going on, but the suddenness of the announcement jolted everybody. They have already got permission from Solomon Islands to station their uh, security forces till the end of next year. They have gifted a petrol boat. They are establishing a petrol point or something, probably to stop illegal fishing. US had ignored this area, to be very, very precise. They had their embassy in Solomon Islands, which was shuttered in 1993. They had a consular presence there. The embassy was far away in Papua New Guinea. So they are reopening it on an urgent basis. They're also planning to open more embassies in the region. So probably they have to empower the islanders economically. They have to give them more opportunities. They have to give them market access to their products to Australia, USA, maybe even Europe, like timber, fish, fisheries is another area where they are good at. They have sugar also, so maybe they should encourage these people to export to these countries. China has already agreed to increase their import of these products from South Pacific islands. China can do it. As I said, they have the power. The party has the power to make decisions. In democracies, it's not that easy. Then New Zealand has something called strategic ambiguity on such issues. I think Jacinda Ardern made a statement that regional powers should sort out the issues among themselves, which is a nice thing. I hope she was, because Chinese media carried it, so I thought that probably she was not very happy with the rivalry going on there. There is an ambiguity in their stand in these matters. I think we have the Quad there. We have the Five Eyes Initiative for Intelligence Sharing. AUKUS is there. Then Quad, of course, is not a military alliance, but eventually it will have some military arm. In my reading, I hope I'm correct. US is sending their Peace Corps volunteers there. So things are happening. So in my view, what the West could do, maybe India may not be a big player in that area. West could do is to empower these people economically, make them independent economically. Of course, no country is independent; they are all intertwined. But let them, and make investments in tourism. That way, these countries will have some standing economically, and give them training, equipment, etc. in their security affairs. Their security requirements are mostly very limited. It is, as we see, it's all domestic issues that have to be handled. So probably they make them strong, make them independent to make independent decisions. Some of the countries will go with China. Nobody can stop that. But others will definitely stay with the Western Bloc. They are all democracy. They are all English-speaking people. English-speaking ability is not a criterion for a country to behave. I totally agree with that. So ultimately, some of the countries will try to play off China with the US or Australia and vice versa. I hope they benefit from that. My only worry about the agreement is that this agreement of providing, stationing security personnel and giving them training is okay. Stationing security personnel from a foreign country to maintain law and order, to ensure stability, social stability, has happened in the past, but in a country with China's background, it's not a good thing, because there are so many takers waiting for that. All these authoritarian countries across the globe are willing to do that to remain in power anywhere in Africa, Asia, Pacific, all these areas. So this may become a trend. There will be exclusive or exclusionary security areas where they will be, that particular area will be run by that area by these particular countries with Chinese help. That may not be good for an open and free navigation or trade that should flow openly through the high seas. So if this catches on, I hope China has not built in this particular development into their Asia Pacific doctrine. If that is happening, probably we can see more countries joining with China, the moneyed China, who are willing to bribe their leadership. So to enable those people themselves to keep in power, remain in power, they may join hands with China with these agreements and create exclusive zones of military influence, which is not good for the international community.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you for shedding light on how important types of governments are also in deciding what the foreign policy is, and how elitism, cronyism, etc., would play a role in China's influence in the region. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for the speakers. Now we shall open the floor for question and answers. We've got a few questions, some of which I'm skipping because we've already answered them in the presentation. This one is addressed to Murali sir by Ritika. Do you think India's move to counter China in the Pacific region would be via Quad, or are there other avenues which China could make moves in?
I think primarily it is through the Quad only, because we are not strong enough to, or maybe it's not in our plan to have a face-off with China in the faraway Indo-Pacific. We are more worried about our areas, but we have good relations with the ASEAN, because we all keep saying about the centrality of the ASEAN in our Act East policy or Indo-Pacific policy. Both are the same to a great extent. We have good relations with the Philippines. Philippines, they are buying our BrahMos missiles. We have good relations with Vietnam. So if China is coming and sitting on our borders, no, I'm not talking about the physical borders in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Myanmar, etc. We can also have good relations with China's neighbors, not for threatening China. Of course, threatening China is not an easy thing, but we can definitely create that sort of atmosphere in China's neighborhood also. So always it is through the Quad that India can pursue its Indo-Pacific policy. Yeah, I think that's the short answer.
Thank you, sir. Now it's a question to Mr. Gill. Can the IPF be used as an instrument, perhaps, to counterweight China's economic influence in the Pacific?
Right. Thank you. And just to cut it short, the particular question, we have to understand that the IPEF it was made significantly because of the U.S. awareness that rigid economic pacts, particularly in a dynamic region like Asia, will be futile compared to, of course, China's ability to be able to provide monetary or financial assistance without rigid requirements. So if we can recall, before President Biden arrived in Asia, he tried to water down the particular framework in order to accommodate as many as possible. In fact, the IPF revolves around loose arrangements and not really based on rigid open markets and all these things that were present in previous pacts. So, but again, the long road for the IPF remains, remains not as accurate as we can all predict, because, of course, of the ability of states to really shift directions. And of course, as we can see, China's economic clout is very significant in Asia, to the point that it is seen as a significant cornerstone of regional economic growth. So what we can really see here is that it depends on how the IPEF is played out, how the major stakeholders present the framework to regional states in order to gain their acceptance towards this and to utilize this for regional growth. But then again, the road is not as simple as providing a counterweight right away. There are several factors that need to be ironed out in order to make it as attractive as the current dominant approach which China is providing. I think you're on mute, Sharon.
Hello? Yes, sorry. Thank you, Don. Now, it's a question addressed to Melissa. In your opinion, what role do you think America might play following Pacific Islands' descent to China's security proposal? This question is posed by Akanksha.
Can you kindly repeat it, please? I couldn't catch it.
Yes. In your opinion, what role do you think America might play following Pacific Island nations' descent to China's security proposal? What could be the next role that America would play?
America, I think I have partially answered it my last part of my last presentation. America should treat countries, other partners like partners, not like pawns. That is the main issue with America. And they still feel that they are the super cop in the geopolitical arena. But that's not the case. It's people understand America's strengths, people respect it, but America has weaknesses. America cannot handle world problems on their own. I think whether we like Trump or not, Donald Trump, he had mentioned it very clearly towards the end of his presidency. Then America should, in this region particularly, America should take steps to I told you that America had ignored this region. They had shuttered their embassy in 1993. They had a consular presence, a minimal consular presence. But now they are reopening this particular embassy and opening more embassies in some other countries in the region. They're sending the Peace Corps volunteers for developmental, engaging in developmental assistance. They should give, I'm sure they will give market access to goods and services produced in this area. They should also invest in tourism and encourage American tourists, but America is not Chinese. People are independent thinking. They will not go to a country just because the government said you go and visit that country. That's the Chinese practice to a great extent even now. So that's not possible. But help them in their fisheries, in their tourism, invest more money, and strengthen their security capabilities. But when America gives aid, there are restrictions. They expect a lot of things to happen, according to their standards. Whereas in the case of China, if they want to give an assistance, there are no strings attached at all. Only string attached is their loyalty to the Chinese as a nation and to the government or political leadership. So that is why America has to work really hard to balance China's push into that particular region. As Mr. Gill said, that the Biden has they are watering down on so many things, but you can just recall, after the Ukraine invasion, the Americans sermonized India, even coming to New Delhi and saying so many unfair things against, which will hurt all Asian sentiments. So probably for the Americans, that's not a big deal. So they have to learn a lot. I'm not someone who can advise Americans. They are experts in their own field. I have good friends in their foreign service, good people. But as a nation, when they formulate their policy, they have to respect other countries. As the Chinese say, they say common prosperity, common development. We treat you with respect. We are a good friend. We are a good partner. And it's things like that. These things matter a lot, especially with smaller countries. Islanders have. I'm not, saying anything. I have no bad intentions about the islanders, but they have a typical islanders, especially when they are from different ethnic groups. So the country should be able to understand and respect. So I think mutual respect is another thing, and not sermonizing. America has to do a lot on that with the smaller countries, whereas China, even if the president from the smallest of a small country comes, he can get to call on the Chinese president. He will be treated to a banquet, lavishly treated with gifts, and his children will be offered scholarships and all these things. These things matter. So America has to really strive very hard to win over loyalty of at least some 40-50% of the countries in the treaty. I hope,
Thank you, sir. Thank
I
you.
hope I answered the question and I go astray.
Yes, I hope I'm getting it right also. As sir rightly said, mutual trust and confidence and respect is the key to flourishing cooperation between countries, multilaterally and bilaterally. I'm afraid we've come to the end of today's webinar. Murali sir, Mr. Gill, we thank you for engaging our minds so interestingly for the past hour or so and taking us through the nuances of engagements and nature of engagements of China and the South Pacific, the challenges and the prospects that it offers for India to cooperate with the region as well. It was an honor to host you this evening. I thank all the participants for logging in from different parts of the country and the world and listening so intently and for your questions as well. I know this is a topic that we can go on and discuss for another hour or two, but let's just hope that we continue our engagements through social media as well as through our fellows further and through webinars and podcasts coming in the future. At CPPR, we look forward to more such fruitful engagements with you all through our webinars and conferences. Please follow our website and social media handles for further updates. With this, I'd like to formally close today's proceedings. Wishing you all a lovely evening and a weekend. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so
for
much.
the patient. Thank you.
Recording stopped.